He was describing the scene in Saudi Arabia after an Iraqi-launched Scud missile blew up over a U.S. military barracks. Saudi officials say at least 12 American military personnel were killed, 25 wounded, and 40 others unaccounted for. Rescue workers took away the dead and cared for the wounded as others combed the rubble for possible survivors. Saudi officials report the Scud blew up in midair, and debris from the missile caused the explosions and damage. There are conflicting reports on the status of Kuwait's capital. One American official tells the Associated Press that forces are closing in on Kuwait City but plan to wait before retaking it. Yet another leader of the military coalition told United Press International that fighting in the capital is underway. As the attacking units move north, they see a lot of debris and abandon Iraqi positions. America's Central Command reports about 100 Iraqi tanks were destroyed today alone. American Apache helicopters were aiming at Iraqi Republican Guard units that moved south from the Iraqi-Kuwait border. Those units are considered Saddam Hussein's best.
Can you tell us anything at the moment about the Republican Guard in terms of whether or not the Republican Guard is coming out? Are they moving at all?
We have engaged some forces of the Republican Guards and enjoy the same success that we're having against other forces.
The Defense Department lists 24 Americans as killed in action so far. A Saudi official says 48 Allied troops and allies have died as well. At least 40 attacking personnel are reported as injured. Some of them are being treated at a field hospital inside Kuwait. As for whether U.S. Marines will storm Kuwaiti beaches, well, one source says maybe we will, maybe we won't. At last report, the vast majority of Marine amphibious forces were still holding back. But they were sending in waves of helicopters to scout and confuse Iraqi defenders. Carl Rochelle has more.
Thousands of U.S. Marines remain on amphibious assault ships in the Persian Gulf. They have not yet made the landings we had expected in the early days of the war. Officials say one of the reasons the Marines have not gone ashore is because of extensive minefields found in the northern waters of the Persian Gulf.
Until the mine clearance operations are completed, and I'm not sure when that's going to be, near future sometime, but until that's completed, I don't expect to be tasked to go into the assault. That has got to be done before we go in.
Military sources say minefields found in the area near Falaka Island off the Kuwaiti coast after the amphibious assault ship Tripoli and the cruiser Princeton hit mines are much more extensive than they had earlier believed and include sophisticated Soviet-type mines that are extremely difficult to detect. That has slowed down mine-clearing operations and disappointed some Marines who were waiting to hit the beach.
If I don't get out the ship, then I've just sat over here for 6 months, you know, blowing time. You know, it's useless. All I've been doing is just watching the waves go by.
I'd say for the most part, we'd all feel cheated if we didn't get to participate in it.
I'm sure some of us would have liked to have gotten our feet wet, but at the same time, we're fortunate that we're on board ship and not getting shot at, too.
But Marines are being told to stay ready. The mines are only a temporary delay.
We have swept certain lanes to get in relatively close, and we can range most of it now with our helicopters if there's a requirement to go in and do something.
Marine Corps Harrier jets from the amphibious assault ship Nassau switched to a ground support role when the offensive got underway and are continuing to pound the Iraqis throughout the day. And Sunday night, a group of Marine Corps helicopters from the Nassau conducted a reconnaissance operation along the Kuwaiti coast that drew fire from Iraqi defenders. The Marines say even though they have not made a landing yet, they continue to tie up 5 to 6 Iraqi divisions along the coast just by being there. Carl Rochelle, CNN, Saudi Arabia.
Allied forces are trying to form 2 rings around the Iraqi occupation troops. One would go through Iraq with America's Army and the French Foreign Legion attempting to block supply routes. The other would surround Kuwait City and is led by U.S. Marines. If the circles are closed, an Iraqi withdrawal could theoretically become impossible. Saudi, French, and British forces also report success in moving into Iraq and Kuwait. British officials say they had no casualties as they broke through the first line of Iraqi defenses in the ground war. And French commanders report taking at least 3,000 Iraqi prisoners and neutralizing an entire division as French troops moved 100 miles into Iraq. U.S. military officials say women pilots were part of the largest helicopter assault in military history. Major Marie Rossi is one of those women from the Army's 101st Airborne Division who took part in the mission into Iraq yesterday. Reporters talked to her before she left on her flight.
my tent is with my other 2 female officers, so we kind of, we thought it was pretty neat that 3 women were going to be across the border before the rest of the battalion was. It's initially excitement that it was going to kick off and that we were going to be part of the first assault going over. I think there's some nerves, you know, in talking with them this morning, there's nervous feelings about going across, but mostly it's just readiness to go do it.
The American count of Iraqi prisoners now stands at about 18,000 in 2 days. Saudi Arabia puts the total at more than 20,000, while Iraq claims the numbers are exaggerated. Allied spokesmen say entire battalions are surrendering en masse. A Saudi army officer was asked about their condition.
And generally, most of them, they are weak, they are hungry, they have no object to fight. You understand about this?
Are they generally happy that the war is over, or are they depressed when they give up?
When they arrive to us, they are depressed, but we don't know exactly the feeling inside.
In the northern Persian Gulf today, Allied warships destroyed 2 incoming Silkworm missiles launched by Iraq. British officials credit the HMS Gloucester with firing the anti-missile missiles that shot down the Silkworms. The Silkworms are used in coastal defense operations and can be launched from fixed or mobile sites, carrying 1,000-pound warheads. The Gloucester is riding alongside the USS Missouri to protect it as it fires giant 16-inch guns at Iraqi targets on the Kuwaiti coast. So after an apparently successful 48 hours, the ground offensive of Operation Desert Storm now enters its 3rd day. Back to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Toria. Many
I
physical...
believe he said he was in the vicinity of the airport. There still is ground fire going around. He reported artillery fire, and so there are still pockets of isolated resistance. There, in fact, may be some units out there that haven't gotten the word, and this is one of the things that happens in a big military operation. Communications are one of the first things that your enemy tries to cut off.
Well, I think that's important to point out because as we have heard from some of these troops that have already surrendered, they did not know about Saddam Hussein's broadcast. They were just waiting for somebody to give up to. There they were stranded out in the desert, and when Egyptian forces got to them, they said, we want to surrender. They didn't seem to know anything about Saddam's orders, so there may well be some units still there who are going to fight when they're approached.
And we even see some of that in General Neal's briefing at Riyadh. Bob McEwen is in Kuwait City. Bob McEwen has some more immediate information on what's going on in Kuwait City in an isolated area, then has filtered back to Riyadh and is available to give to the press and to present to the world. The numbers of prisoners, for example, seems to me modest after you see some of the imagery that we've seen of Marines with thousands of prisoners there in the desert. But this reflects the kind of conservative reporting we've heard from Central Command, we've heard from the coalition in general, and they'll catch up. All out of Kuwait and have been for some time. There was a division down here, but it withdrew a week or 2 ago. The Republican Guard are essentially up in the location where they were on 1 August. You may recall that Saddam offered a day and a half or so ago that, well, we'll withdraw to where we were on 1 August. Well, that's right where they were on 1 August, and that's where they sat, and it took them about 5 hours to get down to Kuwait City.
So they may, in fact, think that they're at home.
Yes.
When you say, where are they going to go, they may think that that's where they're supposed to stay.
We're where we belong. But that's one of the reasons why the President finds this incredible. This is an absurd kind of offer to withdraw from Kuwait. It's too late for that. Withdrawal, and perhaps we should talk about that. Mm-hmm. Withdrawal is an activity that a military force undergoes of their own volition at a time in choosing of the commander who's in charge. Withdrawal may be done under some kind of pressure, but largely it's a very orderly kind of affair, and it's planned, and you withdraw on your schedule. A retreat, on the other hand, is one that's done under pressure of enemy action, and you're under attack. And a retreat is a much more difficult military maneuver to effect. You have to defend against the forces that are attacking you, and you have to get your forces and your equipment and to pull them back under fire. That's very difficult. And then the next item that I think is probably important, it has to do with surrender. And you find out that if you withdraw and you do that because there is no enemy pressure, that's easy. If you retreat and you're trying to do that under pressure, that's very difficult. If you're surrounded, and that's the condition that the Iraqis find themselves in now, they perhaps can fight their way out.
We want to go back to Dan Rather. Quickly, though, General, What happens to the Republican Guards? What do we want them to do? Simply surrender in place?
We want them to surrender in place. They're almost surrounded at the present time. We want them to turn in their military equipment. We want them to be clearly a defeated army and not to have the ability to, again, affect the threat to Kuwait and the rest of this region.
And most of all, abandon their equipment.
Abandon their equipment.